The water came without warning in the night, a wall of destruction that turned Silverton, Colorado into a churning hell of mud and debris. And when Sarah Mitchell crawled onto her roof in nothing but her nightdress, clutching the wooden beam that had once been part of her kitchen, she watched everything she had worked 5 years to build disappear into the darkness. The rain hammered down as dawn broke gray and cold over what remained of the town. Sarah sat shivering on the slanted roof of her small house, the only part still visible above the brown water that had swallowed Main Street. Her hands were raw and bleeding from the splinters in the beam she had clung to all night. Her father's pocket watch, the deed to her seamstress shop, the quilts her mother had made before the fever took her, the savings she had hidden in a tin under the floorboards, all of it was gone. 23 years old, and she had nothing left but the thin cotton nightdress plastered to her skin and the will to keep breathing. She heard the splash of oars before she saw the boat. A flat-bottomed skiff emerged from the rain, propelled by a man in a dark hat and oilskin coat. He navigated around the floating wreckage with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the rooftops. When he spotted her, he changed course immediately. "Hold on there," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "I'm coming to get you." Sarah tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She watched him approach, noting the strong set of his shoulders, the calm determination in his movements. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with a face weathered by sun and wind. He brought the skiff alongside her roof and stood carefully, balancing in the rocking boat. "Can you move? Anything broken?" "I can move," she managed, her voice hoarse from screaming into the storm all night. He reached up and she took his hand. His grip was warm and strong, and he pulled her down into the boat with surprising gentleness. The moment her feet touched the bottom of the skiff, her legs gave out. He caught her before she fell, wrapping the oilskin coat around her shoulders. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Sarah looked up at him through the rain. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds breaking apart. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish appearance that contrasted with the kindness in his expression. "My shop," she whispered. "Everything I owned." "I know," he said, settling her onto the bench and picking up the oars again. "Half the town's gone, but you're alive. That's what matters right now." He rowed with strong, even strokes, navigating through the flooded streets toward higher ground. Sarah pulled the coat tighter, breathing in the scent of leather and tobacco and something else, something clean like sage. She watched him row, mesmerized by the rhythm, focusing on it to keep from thinking about the devastation around them. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "William Irons," he said, glancing at her between strokes. "Most folks call me Will. I run cattle up in the high country during summer, work the ranches in winter." "Sarah Mitchell. I had a seamstress shop on Main Street." She swallowed hard. "I had a shop." "I know who you are," Will said. "You mended my best shirt last spring. Did beautiful work. Put an eagle on the pocket, stitched in blue thread." She remembered. A cowboy with gentle hands and polite words, unusual in a town where men often treated a woman in business as either a curiosity or an opportunity. He had paid her full price without haggling and tipped his hat when he left. They reached the hill where the church stood, its white steeple jutting defiantly above the flood line. Other survivors huddled under makeshift shelters, wrapped in blankets, staring at the water with hollow eyes. Will guided the skiff onto the muddy slope and jumped out, pulling it higher before helping Sarah onto solid ground. A woman rushed over with a blanket. "Lord have mercy," another one. "Come here, child, let's get you dry." But Sarah couldn't move. She stood at the water's edge, staring at the submerged town. The flood had come from the Animas River, swollen by days of heavy rain in the mountains. Someone said a natural dam upstream had given way, sending a torrent down the valley. It didn't matter why. What mattered was that everything was gone. Sarah. Will's voice cut through her shock. She turned to find him watching her with those steady eyes. "Come up to the church. You need to get warm and eat something." "I don't have anything," she said, and hearing the words out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. No clothes, no money, no home, nothing. Will stepped closer. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat, but he didn't seem to notice. "Then we'll build it back together." Sarah stared at him. "What? Your shop, your home, whatever you need. We'll build it back together." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, like he hadn't just offered to rebuild a stranger's entire life. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "I know you work hard. I know you're skilled at what you do. I know you didn't give up out there all night when you could have." He pushed his hat back slightly. "And I know what it's like to lose everything. When I was 19, my family's ranch burned. My parents died in the fire. I had nothing but the horse I'd been riding and the clothes on my back. A neighbor helped me get back on my feet. Said someday I'd have the chance to do the same for someone else. I guess today's that day." Before Sarah could respond, a shout went up from the water. Another survivor on a roof, waving frantically. Will immediately moved back toward the skiff. "Get warmed up," he told Sarah. "I'll be back." She watched him row away into the rain, this stranger who had just promised to rebuild her life. The woman with the blanket guided her toward the church, but Sarah kept looking back until Will disappeared into the gray morning. The church became a refuge for the displaced. Reverend Thomas and his wife, Martha, organized everything with military precision, setting up sleeping areas, rationing food, tending to the injured. Sarah found herself in a corner with a group of women, all of them wrapped in borrowed clothes, all of them wearing the same expression of shock and loss. She learned that 12 people had died in the flood, swept away in the initial surge. The blacksmith's wife. 2 children from the family that ran the general store. Old Tom McCreary, who had refused to leave his cabin. The names piled up like the debris in the water, each one a small tragedy in the larger disaster. Will made 6 more trips in the skiff that day, bringing back survivors, supplies from homes on the edge of the flood, anything that could be salvaged. He worked tirelessly, never stopping to rest, always calm even when others panicked. Sarah watched him from the church window, this cowboy who had made her an impossible promise. As darkness fell, the rain finally stopped. The water level began to drop slowly, revealing the true extent of the damage. Buildings had collapsed, their walls unable to withstand the pressure. Others stood at crazy angles, foundations undermined. The street was covered in a layer of mud and debris several feet thick. Will came into the church long after dark, exhausted and soaked through. Martha Thomason made him sit and eat, mothering him despite his protests that others needed the food more. Sarah brought him coffee, strong and hot, and he accepted it gratefully. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for this morning, for pulling me off that roof." "You don't need to thank me," Will replied. He wrapped his hands around the tin cup, and she saw that his knuckles were scraped raw from the oars. "I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Sarah said. She sat down beside him on the bench, conscious of the fact that she was wearing a dress 3 sizes too large, donated by Martha, her hair hanging in tangles down her back. "And not everyone would promise what you promised." Will looked at her directly. "I meant what I said. When the water goes down and we can assess the damage, we'll figure out what it takes to rebuild your shop. I've got some money saved. I know carpentry. We'll make it work." "I can't let you do that," Sarah protested. "I can't take your savings, your time. It's too much." "It's not about taking," Will said. It's about working together. You'll pay me back someday if you want, or you'll help someone else when they need it. That's how it works. That's how we survive out here." Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. He had fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and his hands were calloused from hard work. There was nothing soft about him, nothing gentle in the traditional sense, yet she felt safer sitting next to him than she had in months. "Why did you come to town yesterday?" she asked. "Before the flood, delivering cattle to the rail yard," Will said. "I was staying at the boarding house when the water hit, helped Mrs. Anderson get to the roof before I went looking for others." He drank his coffee. "She didn't make it. By the time I got back to her, she had fallen into the water. I tried to reach her, but the current was too strong." Sarah saw the grief in his eyes and reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "I'm sorry." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "That's why I kept going back out. Every person I pulled off a roof, I kept thinking maybe it made up for the one I couldn't save." "It doesn't work like that," Sarah said softly. "You can't carry that guilt." "Can I?" Will looked at her, and she saw something raw in his expression. "Seems like guilt is about the only thing I've got left from that night." They sat together in silence, two people who had lost everything, surrounded by others in the same situation. Around them, the church hummed with quiet conversations, children crying, the sounds of survival. Outside, the water continued its slow retreat, revealing more destruction with every passing hour. Over the next 3 days, the flood waters receded enough for people to return to their homes, or what remained of them. Sarah walked down Main Street with Will beside her, picking their way through the mud and wreckage. The devastation was worse than she had imagined. Her shop was a collapsed ruin, the walls buckled inward, the roof caved in. Everything inside would be destroyed, soaked through and buried under tons of mud. She stood in front of it, this building that had represented her independence, her future, her escape from the poverty she had grown up in. 5 years ago, she had arrived in Silverton with $10 and a needle, working odd jobs until she saved enough to rent this space. She had built her business one stitch at a time, earning a reputation for quality work and fair prices. She had been proud of what she had accomplished. Now it was gone. Will didn't say anything. He just stood beside her, solid and present, letting her grieve. When she finally turned away, he followed without comment. Her house was in better shape. The walls still stood, though the door hung off its hinges and the windows were broken. Inside was a disaster of mud and debris, but it was salvageable. Will walked through each room, testing the floor, examining the walls, checking the ceiling for water damage. "The structure's sound," he said finally. "It'll need cleaning, new floors, repairs to the roof, but it can be saved." Sarah looked around the destroyed interior and wanted to cry. "I don't know where to start." "We start by clearing out the debris," Will said. "Then we assess what needs fixing. Then we fix it, one piece at a time. You don't have to see the whole staircase, you just have to take the first step." He made it sound simple. Perhaps it was. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, let's start." They worked all day, shoveling mud, hauling out ruined furniture, clearing space. Will's strength made the work go faster, but Sarah refused to let him do everything. This was her home, her recovery, and she needed to be part of it. Her hands blistered and her back ached, but there was something therapeutic about the physical labor, about doing something instead of just mourning. Other townspeople joined them. Tom Crawford, who owned the saloon, brought tools. Maria Sanchez, who ran the boarding house that had survived the flood, brought food. Even Reverend Thomas came down with several of the men who were staying at the church, organizing a work crew. The disaster had brought out something fundamental in the community, a determination to rebuild together. By nightfall, Sarah's house was cleared of debris. The bones of it stood stark and empty but clean. Will started a fire in the stone fireplace, one of the few things that had survived unscathed, and they sat on the floor eating the stew Maria had brought. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for everything today." "You worked harder than anyone," Will replied. "I just helped." "You did more than help. You organized everyone. You kept people focused. You knew exactly what needed to be done." She looked at him across the firelight. "You're good at this. Taking charge, I mean." Will smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "I ran a ranch for 2 years before it burned. You learn to organize or nothing gets done." "Tell me about it," Sarah said. "The ranch." So he did. He talked about his parents, hard-working people who had come west after the war, looking for a fresh start. His father had been a Union officer, his mother a teacher from Pennsylvania. They had built the ranch in the grasslands east of Denver, raising cattle and horses. Will had grown up learning every aspect of the operation, from breaking horses to mending fences to keeping books. "I was going to inherit it," he said quietly. "My father had plans to expand, buy more land. Then one night, a lamp got knocked over in the barn. The hay caught fire and it spread too fast. My father went back in to save the horses. My mother went in after him. Neither of them came out." Sarah's heart ached for him. "How did you survive?" "I was in town that night, playing cards with some other ranch hands. By the time I got back, it was over. The barn, the house, everything burned to ash, and my parents with it." He stared into the fire. "I sold what was left of the land to pay their debts and started over. That was 5 years ago. Been working ranches and trailing cattle ever since." "Do you want your own place again?" Sarah asked. "Someday," Will said. "I've been saving. There's good grazing land up in the high valleys if you know where to look. I've got my eye on a piece near the Uncompahgre, but I need more capital before I can make an offer." He looked at her. "What about you? How did you end up running a seamstress shop in Silverton?" Sarah told him her story. Growing up in a mining camp in Wyoming Territory, watching her mother take in sewing to supplement her father's meager wages from the mine. Learning the skill as soon as she was old enough to hold a needle. Her father dying in a cave-in when she was 16. Her mother following a year later from pneumonia. Finding herself alone with nothing but her sewing skills and a determination not to end up like so many other poor women, trading the only thing they had left for survival. "I came to Silverton because the mines were booming and miners needed clothes mended," she said. "I worked from a tent at first, then saved enough to rent the shop. I was making a good living. I was even starting to think about expanding, maybe hiring another seamstress." She laughed bitterly. "Then the flood happened. You'll have that shop again," Will said with certainty. "It might take time, but you'll rebuild it." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see how hard you work. Because you haven't given up even after losing everything. Because you have the same fire I saw in my mother when things got tough, the kind that says you'll do whatever it takes." He leaned forward. "You're a survivor, Sarah Mitchell. The flood took your building, but it didn't take that." Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forming in the firelight built on shared loss and shared determination. Sarah felt it like a physical thing, warm and solid, something to hold onto in the chaos. They slept in the church that night, but the next morning they returned to Sarah's house. Will had borrowed tools from Tom Crawford, and he spent the day working on the most critical repairs, replacing broken boards, fixing the roof, making the structure weatherproof. Sarah cleaned, scrubbing mud from every surface, washing the walls, preparing the space. More survivors were returning to assess their own damage. The town was slowly coming back to life, though it would never be quite the same. The general store was gone completely, washed away in the first surge. The bank had survived, but all the records were destroyed. The hotel where Will had been staying was structurally unsound and would need to be torn down. Rebuilding would take months, maybe years. But people were determined. Silverton had survived mining accidents, harsh winters, economic downturns. It would survive this too. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Will would arrive at Sarah's house each morning and they would work together, repairing, rebuilding, slowly bringing the house back to livable condition. Other townspeople helped when they could, trading labor back and forth, everyone working on everyone else's problems. Sarah learned things about Will during those long days of work. He was methodical and patient, never rushing a job even when it would have been faster. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. He was generous with his time and resources, always the first to help someone else even when his own work was unfinished. She also learned he was stubborn. When Sarah insisted she couldn't accept more of his help without paying him, he simply ignored her and kept working. When she tried to send him away, saying he had already done too much, he showed up the next morning as if she hadn't said anything. "You're impossible," she told him one afternoon. They were replacing the floorboards in her bedroom, working side by side in the small space. "So I've been told," Will replied, hammering a nail with precision. "You're pretty stubborn yourself. I'm practical. There's a difference. Is that what you call refusing help when you clearly need it?" "Practical?" He looked at her with amusement in his eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like stubborn pride." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She had been refusing help out of pride, unable to accept that she needed charity. But what Will was offering wasn't charity. It was partnership, community, the same thing he had talked about that first night. "All right," she said quietly. "You're right. I've been too proud. I'm sorry." Will stopped hammering and turned to face her fully. They were close in the small room, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Nothing to apologize for," he said softly. "Pride is what kept you alive on that roof. Pride is what got you this far. Just maybe let it rest for a bit while you recover." "Only if you tell me why you're really doing this," Sarah said. "The truth, not the story about your neighbor helping you." Will was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat back on his heels, setting the hammer aside. "You want the truth?" "I'm doing this because when I pulled you off that roof, soaking wet and shaking, with nothing left but your will to survive, I saw someone worth knowing. Someone strong and brave and real. And I thought, if I could help this woman rebuild, maybe I'd find something worth building for myself too." Sarah's breath caught. "Will, I know it's fast," he continued. "I know we barely know each other, but out here you learn to recognize quality when you see it, whether it's in a horse, a piece of land, or a person. And Sarah, you're quality through and through." She should have been offended, being compared to livestock and property. Instead, she understood exactly what he meant. In the West, survival depended on quick judgment and decisive action. You learned to see people clearly, to assess character quickly, because your life might depend on it. "Your quality too," she said. "The best man I've met in a long time. Maybe ever." They looked at each other in the dusty afternoon light, the house quiet around them, the town slowly rebuilding beyond the walls. Sarah felt something bloom in her chest, warm and frightening and exhilarating all at once. She had never been in love. There had been no time for it, no space in her life for anything but survival and work. But she thought this might be what it felt like, this pull toward another person, this desire to know everything about them, to share space and time and future. Will reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face gently, his work-roughened hand surprisingly tender against her cheek. "I'd like to court you properly," he said. "If you're willing. I know the timing isn't ideal with everything that's happened, but I don't want to pretend I don't feel what I'm feeling." "What are you feeling?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Like I found something I didn't know I was looking for," Will said. "Like maybe losing everything led me exactly where I needed to be." Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she saw hope in his expression, vulnerability beneath the cowboy's weathered exterior. This man who had saved her life, who had worked beside her for weeks without asking anything in return, who had made her laugh in the midst of disaster. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." Will smiled, that transforming smile that made him look younger, less burdened. Then he leaned in and kissed her soft and careful, a question and a promise all at once. Sarah kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him, the reality of this connection forming between them. When they pulled apart, Will touched his forehead to hers briefly. "We should finish this floor," he said, though his voice was rough with emotion. "We should," Sarah agreed, though she made no move to step away. They worked the rest of the afternoon in a comfortable silence, but everything had changed. The air between them hummed with possibility. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Sarah's body. Every shared glance held meaning. As the sun set, Will walked Sarah to the church where she was still sleeping. At the door, he took her hand. "Tomorrow, after we work, I'd like to take you to dinner. Maria's boarding house is serving meals now. Let me buy you a proper supper." "I'd like that," Sarah said. She squeezed his hand. "Will, thank you for everything, for seeing me." "Always," he said simply. Then he kissed her hand and walked away into the twilight, his silhouette strong against the darkening sky. Sarah watched him go, her heart full in a way it hadn't been since before her parents died. The flood had taken everything material she owned, but it had brought her this chance at something real, something lasting. Perhaps destruction sometimes cleared the way for new growth. Perhaps losing everything meant she finally had room for what really mattered. The next weeks were a blend of hard work and growing intimacy. They rebuilt Sarah's house during the day, transforming it from a mud-filled disaster to a livable home. Will taught Sarah basic carpentry, and she taught him to appreciate fine detail work. They developed a rhythm, moving around each other with increasing ease, anticipating needs, working as a team in the evenings. Will courted her properly. They took walks along the river, now returned to its normal flow, the destruction it had caused already beginning to fade into the landscape. They had dinner at Maria's boarding house, sitting at the long table with other survivors, sharing stories and rebuilding not just buildings but community. They attended the church social, where Will danced with her under paper lanterns, holding her close while the fiddle played and other couples swirled around them. Sarah learned more about him with each passing day. She learned he was an excellent cook, having lived alone for years, and that he made the best coffee she'd ever tasted. She learned he was educated, his mother having taught him to read and write and appreciate literature. He could quote Shakespeare and Emerson, though he rarely did, preferring to speak plainly. She learned about his dreams. The ranch he wanted to build, not as large as his parents had been, but something manageable and sustainable. The life he envisioned, working land he owned, building something permanent. He talked about breeding quality horses, about establishing a reputation for honest dealing and good stock. "I want to build something that lasts," he told her one evening as they sat on her newly repaired porch, watching the stars emerge. "Something I can pass on. The fire taught me that nothing's guaranteed, but it also taught me that giving up isn't an option. You rebuild, you start over, you keep going." "Is that what I am?" Sarah asked, only half teasing. Part of your rebuild. Will turn to look at her serious. No, you're the reason rebuilding matters. There's a difference between surviving and living, Sarah. I've been surviving for 5 years. With you, I feel like I might actually live again. Sarah reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I feel the same way. Before the flood, I was so focused on my business, on building security, that I forgot what I was building it for. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I just saved enough money, I'd feel safe. But safety isn't about money or buildings. It's about people. It's about connection. It's about trust, Will added. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. I trust you, Sarah. That's not something I give easily. I know, she said. I trust you too. They sat together in the comfortable silence that had developed between them, the kind that only comes when two people truly understand each other. Silverton was rebuilding around them, the sound of hammers and saws a constant backdrop, people calling to each other in the streets, life slowly returning to normal. But for Sarah, normal had been redefined. Normal now meant Will arriving each morning with coffee and a smile. Normal meant working side by side with someone who saw her as an equal partner. Normal meant falling asleep thinking about him and waking up eager to see him again. 6 weeks after the flood, Sarah's house was finished. It looked different from before, the new lumber still bright against the old, but it was solid and weatherproof in hers. Will had insisted on adding a few improvements: a better stove, stronger locks on the doors, a small addition to the back that could serve as a workspace. For your sewing, he explained when she protested the extra expense. Until we can rebuild your shop, you need somewhere to work. Might as well be convenient. They stood in the finished house, the evening light streaming through the clean windows, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It's beautiful. It's better than before. You're going to make me blush, Will said, but he looked pleased. He walked through the rooms one final time, checking his work, making sure everything met his standards. In the new workspace, he stopped and turned to her. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. His serious tone made her nervous. What is it? The man I work for, John Henley. He runs a big cattle operation up north. He's expecting me back in 2 weeks to help with the fall roundup. Will took off his hat, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. I'll be gone for 6 weeks, maybe 8, depending on the weather and how the drive goes. Sarah's stomach dropped. 6 weeks. After spending nearly every day together for the past month and a half, the thought of 6 weeks apart felt impossible. But she kept her voice steady. You have to work, I understand that. Do you? Will stepped closer. Because I'm not sure I do. 2 months ago, I would have been eager to get back to the range. Now all I can think about is that I don't want to leave you. Then don't, Sarah said impulsively. Stay in Silverton, find work here. I gave Henley my word I'd return, and I need the money from this job to finish what I started. He reached for her hands. I'm planning to file a claim on that land I told you about, up near the Uncompahgre. The job with Henley will give me enough to make the down payment and start building. That's wonderful, Sarah said, meaning it despite her disappointment. That's what you've been working toward. It is. But Sarah, I'm not building it just for me anymore. I'm building it for us if you'll have me. Will pulled her closer. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 6 weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you. When I get back from the roundup, I want to marry you if you'll say yes. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Marriage, a life together, everything she hadn't let herself want because it seemed impossible suddenly offered to her freely. Will I? You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Think about it while I'm gone. I know it means leaving Silverton, leaving your business. I know it's asking a lot. But I promise you, Sarah, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." "I don't need to think about it," Sarah said. Her voice was trembling but certain. "I love you too. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes to all of it." Will's face broke into a grin of pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, her feet leaving the ground, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, deeply, a kiss full of promise and passion and commitment. "I'll work as fast as I can," he said when they finally broke apart. "I'll finish the roundup and get back here before the first snow. We'll get married right away, spend the winter planning and saving, and in the spring we'll move up to the new ranch and start building." "What about my seamstress work?" Sarah asked. It mattered to her, that skill and independence she had fought so hard to maintain. "Bring it with you. The ranches up there always need someone who can sew and mend. You could make a good business serving the area. And anything you make is yours, Sarah. I'm not asking you to give up your independence. I'm asking you to join it with mine." It was the right answer, the only answer that would have worked. Sarah kissed him again, pouring everything she felt into it, all her love and hope and excitement for the future they would build together. Will left 2 days later. Sarah stood on her porch and watched him ride out of town on his bay gelding, his bedroll and gear tied behind the saddle, his hat tilted against the morning sun. He turned in the saddle to wave one last time before disappearing around the bend in the road. The house felt empty without him. Sarah threw herself into work, trying to fill the hours until his return. She set up her sewing workspace, grateful that she had managed to salvage a few tools from the flood, and began taking in mending work. Word spread quickly that she was working again, and soon she had more business than she could handle. Maria Sanchez became a good friend during those weeks. The older woman had lost her husband to a mining accident years before and understood the challenges of running a business as a woman alone. She gave Sarah advice, introduced her to potential customers, and provided company in the evenings when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. "He'll be back," Maria said one night over coffee. "I've known a lot of cowboys in my time, and Will Irons is one of the good ones. When he makes a promise, he keeps it." "I know," Sarah said. "I trust him. It's just hard being apart." "That's how you know it's real," Maria said wisely. "If it was easy, it wouldn't mean as much." Letters arrived sporadically, brought by riders passing through on their way from the northern ranges. Will's handwriting was surprisingly elegant, his words both practical and romantic. He described the roundup, the challenges of the work, the beauty of the high country. But every letter ended the same way, with some variation of "I miss you" and "I'm counting the days." Sarah wrote back, telling him about her business, about the town's continued recovery, about the life waiting for him when he returned. She didn't talk about her fears, about waking in the night wondering if he would change his mind, if the distance would make him reconsider. Those were her burdens to carry alone. September turned to October. The aspens in the high country blazed gold, their leaves shimmering in the wind. Silverton prepared for winter, everyone working to ensure buildings were repaired before the snow came. The town was taking shape again, different from before but resilient, rebuilt by people determined to stay. Sarah commissioned a wedding dress from her own skillful hands, working on it late at night by lamplight. She used fabric she'd been saving for something special, a beautiful cream-colored silk that she'd traded from a traveling merchant 2 years before. The stitching was her finest work, tiny invisible seams, delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She poured all her hope and love into every stitch, creating something beautiful from the wreckage of the flood. The first snow fell in early November, light flurries that dusted the peaks but melted by afternoon. Sarah stood on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, searching the road for a familiar silhouette. Will had said he would return before the snow. He always kept his promises. On November 12th, a rider came into town at dusk. Sarah heard the horse before she saw it, the sound of hooves on the frozen ground. She stepped onto her porch and felt her heart leap. Even in the failing light, she recognized the way he sat his horse, the line of his shoulders, the tilt of his hat. Will. She was running before she made the conscious decision to move, her skirts flying, her careful dignity forgotten. He dismounted before she reached him and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet, holding her tight. "I'm back," he said into her hair. "I'm sorry it took so long. The drive had complications and we had to winter some of the herd early." "I don't care," Sarah said, her face pressed against his coat. He smelled like horse and leather and the outdoors, and it was the best smell in the world. "You're here now. That's all that matters." He set her down and kissed her, a deep, hungry kiss that spoke of 8 weeks of separation and longing. Sarah kissed him back with equal fervor, not caring that they were standing in the middle of Main Street, not caring who might see. When they finally broke apart, Will was grinning. "I missed you so much. Every single day, every single minute." "Show me," Sarah said boldly. "Stay for dinner, stay all evening, tell me everything." They went inside her house and Sarah cooked while Will cleaned up from the trail. Over a simple meal of stew and bread, he told her about the roundup, about the cattle drive, about John Henley being so impressed with his work that he'd given him a substantial bonus. More importantly, he told her about filing the claim on the land he wanted, about making the down payment, about the land now being legally his. "Our land," he corrected himself. "If we're getting married, everything I have is yours too." "When are we getting married?" Sarah asked. Her heart was racing, but her voice was steady. "You said right away when you got back." "Is tomorrow too soon?" Will asked, only half joking. "Tomorrow is perfect," Sarah said. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Will, I don't need a big ceremony or a fancy celebration. I just need you and me and a promise made before God and witnesses. Everything else is extra." Will squeezed her hand. "You're sure? You don't want more time to plan?" "I've had 8 weeks to plan. I've got my dress ready. I've got my answer ready. The only thing I need is you, and now you're here." She smiled at him. "Besides, if we wait too long, you might get called away for another job." "Never again," Will said firmly. "From now on, where you go, I go. We're partners in everything." They went to see Reverend Thomas that evening. The minister was delighted to hear they wanted to marry and agreed to perform the ceremony the following afternoon. Word spread through Silverton overnight, and by noon the next day, the small church was filled with townspeople eager to witness something joyful after months of hardship. Sarah, dressed in her cream silk gown, her hair braided and pinned in a crown around her head. She had no family to stand with her, but Maria Sanchez helped her prepare, fussing over every detail like a proud mother. "You look beautiful," Maria said, tears in her eyes. "Like an angel." "I feel like I'm dreaming," Sarah admitted. 8 weeks ago I had nothing. Now I'm getting married to the best man I've ever known." "You've earned this happiness," Maria said firmly. "Both of you have. Now go get married." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Will stood at the altar in his best suit, the one Sarah had mended months before, looking handsome and nervous and deeply happy. When she walked down the aisle toward him, his expression shifted to something like awe. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached his side. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back, making him smile. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about weathering storms together, about building lives on a foundation of faith and trust. He spoke about how this couple represented everything good about their community, how they had helped rebuild the town, and now would rebuild their lives together. When it came time for vows, Will took Sarah's hands and spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the church. Sarah Mitchell, I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you for the rest of my life. I promise to build our home with you, to work beside you, to be your partner in everything. I promise that when storms come, because they will, I'll face them with you. You'll never be alone again. This I swear. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she responded. William Irons, I promise to love you, trust you, and walk beside you all my days. I promise to be your equal partner, to work with you, to build our dreams, to stand with you in good times and bad. I promise that whatever we face, we'll face it together. You have my heart, my hand, and my promise, now and always. They exchanged simple gold bands, purchased in Durango with Will's bonus money. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Will kissed her thoroughly, eliciting cheers and applause from the gathered townspeople. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and joyful. Tom Crawford opened the newly rebuilt saloon for the reception, providing food and drink. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and music filled the air. Sarah danced with her husband, with Tom Crawford, with Reverend Thomas, with everyone who asked, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Late in the evening, Will took her hand and led her outside into the cool November night. Stars blazed overhead, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. They stood together in the quiet, away from the noise and celebration. Happy? Will asked, pulling her close. More than I ever thought possible, Sarah said. She looked up at him, this man who had pulled her from a roof and into a new life. I love you, Will Irons, my husband. I love you too, Sarah Irons, my wife. He kissed her softly. Ready to go home? They walked back to Sarah's house, hand in hand, newly married, ready to begin their life together. The house that Will had rebuilt with his own hands welcomed them, warm and solid and theirs. That night, they celebrated their marriage in private, discovering each other, learning the language of intimacy and commitment, binding themselves together in body as they had in word. In the morning, Sarah woke wrapped in Will's arms, the sunlight streaming through the window, and felt peace settle over her like a blessing. This was what she had been building toward all along, this connection, this partnership, this love. They spent the winter in Silverton, planning for the spring move to their new land. Will took jobs in town and at nearby ranches, building their savings. Sarah's sewing business thrived, and she earned more in those months than she had in the entire previous year. Together, they were formidable, two hard-working people with a shared goal and complementary skills. They talked endlessly about the ranch they would build. Will sketched plans for the house, incorporating Sarah's ideas, designing something that would be both practical and beautiful. They discussed breeding horses, how many cattle they could manage initially, what crops to plant. Every evening was spent in detailed planning, dreaming together, building their future in words and drawings before building it in reality. Word of Will's skills and honest dealing spread. John Henley offered him a permanent position as ranch foreman, but Will declined. He had his own dreams to build. Other ranchers approached him with offers, but he remained focused on his goal. In March, when the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared in the high valleys, they made their move. Will purchased a wagon and loaded it with supplies, Sarah's sewing equipment, the furniture they had collected. They said goodbye to the people of Silverton, promising to return for visits, grateful for the community that had supported them. Maria Sanchez cried when they left. You take care of each other, she said, hugging Sarah tightly. And you come back to visit, you hear me? We will, Sarah promised. Thank you for everything, for being my friend when I needed one most. The journey to their new land took 4 days, traveling slowly with the loaded wagon through mountain passes still clogged with snow. Will drove with confidence, knowing the route, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories of the country they passed through. Sarah sat beside him, wrapped in warm blankets, watching the landscape unfold. Their land was in a high valley near the Uncompahgre River, sheltered by mountains on 3 sides, open to the south where the sun warmed the grass even in winter. A creek ran through the property, providing year-round water. Stands of aspen and pine dotted the landscape. It was beautiful and remote and perfect. "What do you think?" Will asked as they crested the final ridge and the valley spread before them. "It's paradise," Sarah said simply. "It's home." They made camp that first night in the wagon, too excited to be tired. Will built a fire and they sat beside it, planning where the house would go, where the barn should be built, how to lay out corrals and fencing. The future spread before them like the stars overhead, vast and full of possibility. Building the ranch consumed their first year. Will was tireless, working from dawn to dusk on construction. Sarah worked beside him when she could, but she also maintained her sewing business, riding into nearby settlements to deliver work and take new commissions. The money she earned bought supplies they needed, supplementing Will's dwindling savings. The house took shape slowly. Built from logs, Will cut himself from the surrounding forest. It was smaller than his parents' ranch house had been, but solidly constructed and well designed. 2 rooms initially, with plans to add more as needed. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney tall and straight. Windows faced south, capturing light and warmth. They moved in before it was finished, eager to sleep under their own roof. Sarah made curtains from fabric she'd saved, bright, cheerful prints that transformed the raw interior into a home. She cooked their first meal in the new house on the cast iron stove Will had hauled up from Montrose, a simple dinner of beans and cornbread that tasted like a feast. "To our home," Will said, raising his tin cup of coffee in a toast. "To building it together," Sarah replied, clinking her cup against his. Summer brought their first herd of cattle, 20 head purchased from a rancher in the valley below. Will worked them with the skill of someone who had grown up around livestock, and Sarah learned quickly, overcoming her initial fear of the large animals. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work and the responsibility. They also began breeding horses, starting with 2 mares Will had purchased before the wedding. Good horses were always in demand, and Will had an eye for quality bloodlines. He was patient with the animals, gentle but firm, and they responded to his handling. Sarah watched him work and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the care and dedication he brought to everything he did. The work was hard, harder than anything Sarah had done before. There were days when her hands were so sore she could barely hold a needle, when her back ached from lifting and hauling, when she fell into bed exhausted without the energy to even remove her boots. But there was also satisfaction in the work, in seeing tangible progress, in building something from nothing. They faced challenges. A late frost killed their first attempt at a vegetable garden. A mountain lion took one of the calves, and Will spent 3 nights tracking it before finally scaring it far enough away that it didn't return. The creek flooded in July, reminding them both of the Silverton disaster, but the damage was minimal and they rebuilt the affected sections stronger than before. Through it all, their relationship deepened. They learned to read each other's moods, to anticipate needs, to work together with increasing efficiency. They learned to fight productively, to disagree without damaging the underlying love and respect. They learned that partnership meant showing up every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard in the evenings, After the work was done, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sharing thoughts and dreams and plans. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. Those moments were Sarah's favorite, the quiet, peaceful times when the world contracted to just the two of them and the land they were building together. Fall brought their first roundup, preparing the cattle for winter. Will hired 2 ranch hands to help, young men from the valley looking for work. Sarah cooked for the crew, enjoying the social interaction after months with only Will for company. The men were respectful and hardworking, and Will paid them fairly for their labor. When the work was done and the hands had left, winter settled over the valley. Snow came early and heavy that year, blocking the passes, isolating them from the outside world. Sarah and Will spent long evenings by the fire, reading books Sarah had ordered from a catalog, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of those quiet evenings in January that Sarah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been certain. Now, with the evidence undeniable, she found herself both thrilled and terrified. She told Will that night as they prepared for bed, "I'm going to have a baby, sometime in late summer, I think." Will froze in the act of pulling off his boots. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Will, we're going to be parents." He held her at arm's length, studying her face. "How do you feel? Are you all right? Should you be working as hard as you have been?" "I feel fine. And I can still work. Women have been having babies and working ranches for generations. I'll be careful, but I'm not fragile." She put her hands over his on her stomach. "But I'm glad. I want this. I want our child." "I'm glad too," Will said. His voice was thick with emotion. Terrified but glad. "We're going to be parents. We're going to have a family." They stood together in the warmth of their home, holding each other, contemplating the new life growing between them. Outside, snow fell quietly, blanketing the valley in white, peaceful and clean. Inside, they dreamed of the future, of a child learning to ride and work and love the land, of building a legacy that would outlast them both. The pregnancy was easier than Sarah had feared. She was young and healthy, and the physical labor she did daily kept her strong. Will became overprotective, trying to take on all the heavy work, but Sarah refused to be coddled. They compromised, Sarah agreeing to rest when she needed it, Will agreeing to let her continue contributing in meaningful ways. In March, they received their first visitors since the snow had fallen. John Henley, the rancher Will had worked for, rode up with news from the valley and beyond. Over dinner, he caught them up on everything that had happened during the winter, who had died, who had married, what deals were being struck. "I've got a proposition for you," Henley said to Will as Sarah cleared the dishes. "I'm looking to purchase quality horses for my operation. If you could supply me with 4 or 5 good animals each year, I'd pay premium prices. Your reputation for breeding is spreading." Will glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I think we could do that. Let me show you what we've got started." The 2 men went out to the corral, and Sarah watched through the window as Will showed off the young horses they were training. The pride in his bearing was evident, and she felt her heart swell. He had come so far from the grieving young man who had lost everything in a fire. They both had. They had rebuilt, separately and together, creating something beautiful from devastation. Henley left the next morning with a handshake deal for horses, the first of what would become a lucrative breeding business. Sarah and Will celebrated that night, dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear, laughing like children, drunk on success and possibility. Spring came slowly to the high country, but when it arrived it was glorious. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in waves of color. The creek ran high with snowmelt, its music a constant backdrop. Calves were born, increasing their herd. The horses grew sleek and strong on the new grass. Sarah's pregnancy became obvious as she entered her 6th month. Will loved placing his hands on her swelling belly, feeling the baby kick and move. He talked to the child constantly, telling stories, making promises, already acting like a father. What should we name him? Will asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Him, Sarah raised an eyebrow. What if it's a girl? Then we'll name her something beautiful, like her mother. Will kissed Sarah's temple, but I have a feeling it's a boy. Call it intuition. Your intuition has been wrong before, Sarah teased. You thought I'd refuse your marriage proposal. I thought you might say you needed more time. I never thought you'd refuse entirely. Will pulled her closer, carefully positioning her so she was comfortable against his side. I think if it's a boy, we should call him Thomas after your father, and if it's a girl, maybe Rose after my mother. Thomas Irons and Rose Irons, Sarah said, testing the names. I like them both. But let's wait and see who arrives before we commit. In late August, during the hottest part of summer, Sarah's labor began. Will rode down to the valley to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Schultz who had delivered half the babies in the region. He returned within 6 hours, Mrs. Schultz riding behind him, her medical bag secured to her saddle. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah had underestimated how much pain would be involved, how exhausting it would be. Will stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, offering water and encouragement even when she snapped at him to leave her alone. You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Schultz said as the night wore on. The baby's positioned well. It won't be much longer now. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Sarah gave one final push and their son entered the world. His cry was strong and healthy, filling the house with sound. Mrs. Schultz cleaned him efficiently and placed him on Sarah's chest. A boy, she announced unnecessarily. A fine, healthy boy. Sarah looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Will had created, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. He had Will's nose and chin, her dark hair, and eyes that would probably change color as he grew. He was perfect. Thomas, she said, looking up at Will, who stood beside the bed with tears running down his face. His name is Thomas. Will reached out with one finger and touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his father's finger instinctively, holding on. Thomas William Irons, Will said. Welcome home, son. Mrs. Schultz stayed for 3 days, teaching Sarah how to nurse, how to care for a newborn, how to recognize signs of illness. Will was attentive and eager to learn, changing diapers, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, doing whatever Sarah needed. When Mrs. Schultz finally left, Sarah felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Now it was just the 3 of them, a family, responsible for this tiny life. But looking at Will holding their son, singing softly as he rocked him, she felt confident they would figure it out together, just as they had figured out everything else. The ranch adapted to accommodate its newest member. Sarah sewed baby clothes from soft fabric she ordered from a catalog, tiny gowns and blankets and caps. Will crafted a cradle from pine, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving small horses into the headboard. Thomas slept in it beside their bed, his presence transforming the house into a true home. Life with an infant was demanding. Thomas woke every few hours to nurse, leaving Sarah exhausted. The housework piled up. The sewing commissions she had been working on languished unfinished. But there was also joy in the chaos. Moments of pure happiness when Thomas smiled or cooed, when Will played with him on the floor, when they sat together as a family in the evening light. Fall came again, bringing the changing colors and crisp air. Thomas was 3 months old, healthy and growing, developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet. He resembled Will more with each passing day, particularly in the determined set of his jaw when he wanted something. "He's going to be a handful," Sarah predicted one evening, watching Thomas attempt to grab everything within reach. "He's going to be strong," Will countered. "Independent. That's not a bad thing." "Says the man who doesn't have to nurse him," Sarah said, but she was smiling. Will had been an exceptional father from the first moment, patient and gentle and completely devoted. As winter approached, they prepared for the season with the confidence of people who had survived their first year. The barn was stocked with hay for the livestock. The root cellar was full of vegetables from their now successful garden. Firewood was stacked high against the house. They were ready. The winter was harsh but manageable. Snow fell frequently, piling in drifts against the house, transforming the landscape into something beautiful and alien. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they had everything they needed. Will worked on improving the barn, on building furniture for the house, on training a young colt in the indoor arena he had constructed. Sarah sewed and cared for Thomas, teaching him new things every day, watching him grow and learn. They celebrated Thomas's first birthday in late August, just the three of them, with a simple cake Sarah had baked. Thomas smashed his piece enthusiastically, getting more on his face than in his mouth, delighting his parents with his enthusiasm. "Can you believe it's been almost 3 years since the flood?" Sarah said that evening after Thomas was asleep. They sat on the porch in the warm summer night, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers. "Sometimes it feels like another lifetime," Will said. "Sometimes I can barely remember what my life was like before I pulled you off that roof." "Probably lonely," Sarah said. She leaned against his shoulder. "I know mine was. I didn't realize how lonely until I had you to compare it to." "We've built a good life here," Will said. "Better than I imagined." "It's not finished yet," Sarah replied. She had news she'd been waiting to share, wanting the timing to be right. "We're going to need to build an addition to the house, somewhere for Thomas to share with his brother or sister." Will turned to look at her sharply. "You're pregnant again." "I am. Due next spring, I think, March or April." She smiled at his expression of surprise and joy. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Will pulled her close, careful of her still flat stomach. "Sarah, I'm beyond happy. I'm blessed. 2 children, a ranch that's thriving, a wife I love more than life itself. What more could any man want?" "A bigger house," Sarah suggested with a laugh. "A bigger house," Will agreed. "We'll start building next week." The addition took most of the fall to complete, but when it was finished, they had 3 bedrooms instead of 1, plus a larger kitchen and a separate room that Sarah claimed for her sewing work. The house was becoming substantial, a real ranch headquarters, something that would last generations. Sarah's second pregnancy was harder than the first. She was chasing after an active toddler while carrying another child, and the exhaustion was profound. Will did everything he could to lighten her load, but there were still only so many hours in the day. They hired a local girl, 15-year-old Emma Schultz, the midwife's daughter, to help with housework and watching Thomas. The extra hands made an enormous difference. In April, during a late spring snowstorm, Sarah's labor began again. Mrs. Schultz arrived just in time, Emma with her, both women experienced and calm. This labor was faster than the first, and as the storm raged outside, Sarah delivered a daughter. "Rose," she said immediately, looking at the tiny girl with her shock of dark hair and small, perfect features. "Her name is Rose." Will cried again, holding his daughter with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the perfection of her. She's beautiful. She looks like you. She looks like your mother, Sarah corrected gently. You showed me that photograph. She has her face. Thomas, nearly 2 years old, was brought in to meet his sister. He regarded her with solemn eyes, then patted her head gently. Baby, he pronounced clearly. That's right, Will said. This is your baby sister, Rose. You're going to help protect her and take care of her. Thomas nodded seriously, as if accepting a great responsibility. From that moment on, he was devoted to his sister, wanting to be involved in everything concerning her. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Will's horse breeding business was thriving, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to purchase his animals. The cattle herd had increased to over 100 head. They were becoming established, known throughout the region for quality stock and honest dealing. Sarah's sewing business had evolved. She no longer took general mending work, focusing instead on custom pieces, fine shirts and dresses for wealthy clients in Montrose and even Denver. She charged premium prices, and her work was worth it. The money she earned went into an account in her name, savings for the future, for the children's education, for emergencies. They hired permanent help, 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse Will built near the barn. This freed Will to focus on the breeding program and on improving the property. He fenced the pastures properly, built better corrals, constructed a proper stable for the breeding stock. Every improvement added value to the ranch, building equity and security. Years passed in a blur of work and growth. Thomas grew tall and strong, a natural horseman who could ride before he could properly walk. Rose was more cautious, preferring to help Sarah in the house and garden, showing early talent with a needle and thread. They were good children, raised with love and discipline, taught the value of hard work and honest dealing. When Thomas was 8 and Rose 6, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This one was unplanned, coming at a time when she thought her childbearing years were behind her. She was 32 now, Will 35, established and comfortable in their lives. I'm too old for this, she told Will when she confirmed the pregnancy. You're perfect, Will said firmly, and we'll manage just fine. We always do. This pregnancy was the easiest of the 3. Perhaps because Sarah was more confident, or because she had help with the older children, or simply because this baby was meant to be easy. In December, during the quiet of a snowy evening, she delivered another son with minimal fuss. James, Will suggested when he saw the boy. After my father. If that's all right with you. James is perfect, Sarah agreed. She was tired but content, holding her youngest child while her family gathered around. Thomas and Rose peered at their new brother with interest, already planning how they would teach him to ride and sew and everything else they knew. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas was adventurous and bold, always pushing boundaries, destined to be a rancher like his father. Rose was artistic and thoughtful, spending hours sketching the landscape, creating beautiful things with fabric and thread. James, the baby, was clever and curious, always asking questions, wanting to understand how everything worked. Will expanded the operation slowly and carefully, never overextending, always building on a solid foundation. By the time Thomas was 15, the ranch ran 200 head of cattle and had a breeding program that was known throughout Colorado. Will's horses were sought after, his reputation for quality unmatched in the region. Sarah's work had evolved again. She no longer took commissions at all, focusing instead on teaching other women to sew, holding classes in her workroom, passing on the skills her mother had taught her. She charged for the lessons, but she also taught for free those women who couldn't afford to pay, believing that every woman should have a skill that could support her if needed. They prospered. The ranch house was expanded twice more, growing to accommodate not just their family but also guests, business associates, friends from town. It was a welcoming place, known for hospitality, always a warm meal and friendly conversation for anyone who stopped by. Will and Sarah's relationship had deepened over the years into something rare and precious. They had weathered challenges together, storms both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger each time. They still worked side by side daily, partners in every sense. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. They still loved each other with the intensity of that first promise made in the aftermath of disaster. "You ever think about the flood?" Sarah asked one evening. They were alone, the children all occupied with their own activities, the summer night warm and perfect. "Sometimes," Will admitted. "Usually when it rains hard. I remember pulling you off that roof, how scared you were, how strong you were even in the midst of losing everything." "I wasn't strong. I was terrified. You were both. That's what strength is, being terrified and going on anyway." Will reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together like they had 1,000 times before. "The flood took everything you owned, but it gave you to me. I know that sounds selfish, like I'm glad for the disaster, but I'm not. I'm just grateful for where it led." "Me too," Sarah said softly. "That morning, sitting on my roof, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But I hadn't lost anything that truly mattered because I hadn't found it yet. I hadn't found you." "We found each other," Will corrected. "And we built this life together, just like I promised. We rebuilt what the flood took, and then we kept building." Sarah looked out over their property, the barn and corrals, the pastures where their horses grazed, the mountains rising beyond. 3 children slept in the house behind them, healthy and happy and loved. They had friends, community, a life rich with meaning and purpose. "We built it back together," she said, echoing those words Will had spoken so long ago on the muddy hill above flooded Silverton. "And it's so much more than I ever dreamed." Will pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars emerged overhead, countless and brilliant. Tomorrow there would be work to do, horses to train, children to raise, a life to live. But tonight there was just this, the two of them, the love that had grown from disaster, the partnership that had rebuilt not just buildings but lives. Years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a strong young man, eventually taking over more of the ranch operations, displaying his father's eye for horses and his mother's head for business. At 22, he married Emma Schultz, the midwife's daughter who had helped care for him as a child, bringing her home to the ranch to start their own family. Rose developed into a talented artist, selling her sketches and paintings in galleries in Denver and Santa Fe. She married a teacher from Montrose, a quiet, thoughtful man who appreciated her artistic nature. They built a house on the edge of the ranch property, close enough to visit frequently but far enough to have their own space. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine. He studied with the doctor in Montrose, then went east to medical school, becoming the first Irons to earn a university degree. He returned to Colorado to practice, setting up a clinic that served the rural communities scattered throughout the high country. Will and Sarah watched their children build their own lives with pride and satisfaction. They had given them strong foundations, taught them to work hard, to deal honestly, to value family and community. Now they watched those lessons bear fruit in the next generation. As they grew older, Will and Sarah gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, letting Thomas and Emma take over while they enjoyed a slower pace. They still worked, tending the garden, caring for the horses they particularly loved, hosting family dinners every Sunday. But the grinding daily responsibility had passed to younger shoulders. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over the state, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. There was food and music and dancing, just like that night in Silverton so many years before. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Will took Sarah's hand and led her away from the crowd, walking toward the creek where they had first camped when they arrived at this land. 25 years, he said, stopping at the water's edge. A quarter-century of marriage. Sometimes it feels like no time at all, and sometimes it feels like you've been beside me forever. Forever sounds about right, Sarah said. She was 50 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, lines around her eyes and mouth from years of laughter and sun. Will was 53, his hair more gray than brown, his face weathered by decades of outdoor work. But when he looked at her, she saw the same love in his eyes that had been there on their wedding day. "I'd do it all again," Will said. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every setback. I'd do it all again exactly the same if it meant ending up here with you." "Even the flood?" Sarah asked. "Especially the flood," Will said. "Because that's where our story started. That's where I found you." Sarah leaned into his embrace, listening to the creek burble past, the music and laughter from the party drifting on the evening air. Their children were here, their grandchildren, the beginning of a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. They had built something lasting, something good, something that had started with a promise made in the aftermath of disaster. "We built it back together," she said again, the phrase that had become their touchstone, their reminder of how far they had come. "We built it back together," Will echoed, holding her close. "And it was worth every moment." They stood together as darkness fell, two people who had lost everything and rebuilt not just possessions but a life, a love, a legacy. The flood had taken Sarah's shop, her house, everything she owned. But it had given her something infinitely more valuable, a partner, a family, a love that had sustained them through challenges and triumphs alike. As they walked back toward the house, toward the celebration and their children and the life they had built together, Sarah felt nothing but gratitude. The flood had been devastating, yes, but it had also been the beginning of her greatest adventure. Sometimes, she thought, you had to lose everything to find out what really mattered. And what mattered was walking beside her, holding her hand, ready to face whatever came next together. The party continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed and the family settled in for the evening. Will and Sarah stood on their porch one last time, looking out over the ranch that had started as raw land and a dream. "You remember that first night we spent here?" Will asked. "Camping by the creek, making plans. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen," Sarah said. "I remember feeling like we could do anything as long as we did it together." "We did do anything," Will said. "We built this ranch, raised 3 remarkable children, created a legacy. We did it all together, just like I promised." Sarah turned to face him fully. Even after 25 years of marriage, her heart still skipped when he looked at her like that, with complete love and devotion. "Thank you for pulling me off that roof," she said softly. "Thank you for seeing someone worth saving, worth building a life with." "Thank you for saying yes," Will replied. "For believing in me, in us, in what we could build together. You're the best decision I ever made, Sarah Irons." They kissed there on the porch, husband and wife, partners in every sense, surrounded by the life they had built together from the ruins of disaster. And in that moment, Sarah understood that this was what happiness looked like, not the absence of hardship, but the presence of someone to face it with, someone to rebuild with, someone to love through all the storms and all the sunshine. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed to their children and grandchildren, a testament to two people who had refused to give up, who had chosen to build instead of retreat, who had transformed tragedy into triumph through love and partnership and sheer determination. Sarah had lost everything she owned in the flood. Will had said they would build it back together, and they had built something far greater than what was lost. They had built a life, a family, a love that would endure through generations. They had kept their promise to each other, and in doing so had created something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of disaster. As they went inside, ready to sleep in the home they had built with their own hands, surrounded by the family they had created together, Sarah felt complete peace. This was her life, built from nothing, rebuilt from disaster, sustained by love and partnership and determination. This was everything that mattered, and it had all started with a cowboy in a boat, rowing through flood waters, making an impossible promise to a woman who had lost everything. A promise he had kept every single day for 25 years and counting. A promise that had transformed both their lives, turning disaster into destiny, loss into love, and despair into hope. The flood had taken everything she owned. But in the end, it had given her everything that mattered: a home, a family, and a love story that would be told by their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A testament to what two people could build together when they refused to give up, when they chose love over fear, when they kept their promises no matter what challenges they faced. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Will's arms as she had been for 25 years, she smiled. She had lost everything in the flood, but she had gained the whole world, and it had all been worth it.